Yeah, there we go. As promised, me and the furry feline here, who likes to shed all over everything. Yes, you're Mr. Sheddy Machittery. We're going to touch on the wee little folk of the friendly races, otherwise known as the Gnomes and Halflings. Like I said, as promised. And because we can. Now, for one reason or another, there are no gnomes in MERP. So I have no information on gnomes to go by in MERP. As a matter of fact, other than Dungeons and Dragons and the various clone game systems thereof, or the other fantasy sword and sorcery and hack and slash game systems that have come out over the years that are the equivalent of D&D, there are no gnomes mentioned in most game systems that I'm familiar with. It's just not as popular a game system or a popular character race as the mainline ones. And I don't pretend to know why, and I don't care. I just know that they're not there. Now, maybe y'all know more, and you do. Why do you guys know a slew more than me? So if you got other game systems that include gnomes, by all means, put it in the comments. Let us know. Let me know. It's always good to know your gnomes. Know your gnomes. Anyways, this is small folk. So why a book for the small folk? What do gnomes and halflings have in common that warrants inclusion and tome together? The answer to the second question lies in the first. For it is the diminutive size of both these particular races the most significant factor in the way they cope with their environment. I kind of find that a bit cheesy, but hey, this was made in the 80s or 90s. What was this? What's this? I just like to find that information, but I know it's all credits. What was it published? Gotta have a published date. I know I paid $15 for it brand new. 1993, early 90s. The flood of '93, big things going on in Iowa at that time. Just in the company I worked for about a year. Met my current wife. We just got married. The city flooded. Blah blah blah. Okay. Myth of the gnomes. And we don't need to go into their particular mythology and history. Gnome subraces. We have rock gnomes. Seems like the most common gnome is a rock gnome. You want to give me that? Yeah. The Shivrifinifinibbin, the deep gnomes. I'm famous for coming up with some pretty out there names too, but I can't pronounce them. I can't pronounce it if I made it myself. I'm just saying. I'm familiar with these fellows because of the Drizzt Do'Urden story and his encounters. And the Tinker gnomes. Well, it's just a point. I made a point in my other video video about this picture, the decorker. And here's this incredible amount of activity, resources, and I don't know what to call it, insanity. It created a device that's going to pull the plug out, pull the cork out of a bottle. I mean, as opposed to put the cork back in the bottle, it's just because it's obviously not corking a bottle; they're uncorking it. Decorker. So, yeah. And I read all this stuff, and it seemed to me, as I said before, that they don't. This was some kind of running gag at some point that they're all mad and crazy, and they're trying to more or less commit suicide by science somehow. And I think that's not doing them justice as a race, as a playable race. I think it takes a lot of grand potential, and I'm not adverse to them having a lot of quirky failures, but I mean that's part of being that inventor, that crazy inventor, that guy or gal that's going to invent the next butter churn that's going to revolutionize production or what have you, and that makes sense to have that, especially in this developing age. Now, we may or may not have had a topic on this at some point in the past, and I don't remember if we did or not, about having the various ages of the RPGs. And to me, it seems like a lot of like D&D and especially for the setting of Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance, it seems to be more like a Middle Ages or an advanced Middle Ages time period as opposed to an actual Dark Age, let alone the pre-age, because there's levels of civilization that goes way back. And if you talk about old Greece and Rome and things like that, that would be predate the Middle Ages by thousands of years, and yet there was their level of civilization at the time. But there was also quite a bit of time prior to that, or in between, or on the fringes of these great civilized empires, where things were not so damn civilized. So it makes me wonder sometimes exactly how we quantify these game systems. I know the Age of Conan or the Iberian or whatever, the intentions in there, the old stuff originally, was to set it in that prehistory. It was so far back in history that it's myth and mythology today, that it would predate Rome to some degree, and Greece, or just the early days of Greece, that kind of stuff. But I just happen to wonder on that. But you look at these fellows, and I don't think they do a good justice to make them play it as light as they do. I know a number of players who like to play Tinker Gnomes just like they'd like to play Kender, because they're so proud, they're so prone to causing problems, and there's so much humor in it that you can't help it if you get somebody to play one well. If you can't get someone to play one well, it's still a good playable race. Forest Gnomes, more less competent, the ways most people can think of when you think of the garden and the garden gnomes that we see in our neighborhoods today. Festivals, fires, marriage, food, drink, the nose, gems and craftsmanship, trade and taboos, emotions, humor. Most people can't attribute gnomes at all without including this humorous need for pranks and levity. And I have mixed. One of the reasons I probably avoided playing gnomes as much as I have, or discouraged players from playing them in my campaigns, is because a lot of cheesy jokes and humor goes a while, and at some point it gets stale and you get tired of it, and you want people to things to just one running gag. Well, okay. So gnomes are famous, or perhaps infamous, for their sardonic sense of humor. All gnomes love practical jokes. The more elaborate, the better. They can be very discouraging when a gnome decides to express friendship or affection to a non-gnome by making that individual a special target of a string of practical jokes. As a rule, it's considered bad form to devise a joke which actually hurts somebody. The art comes from surprising the victim and making him or her look ridiculous, not injuring them. In a way, the practical joking takes place filled by violence in many human cultures. Two gnomes who have a heated argument are more likely to launch a few taboo traps to prove who is the cleverest than to come to blows. Taking their cue from the Garl Glittergold himself, gnomes extend that attitude to their military endeavors. It is considered a more courageous act to make an enemy look foolish in the eyes of his or her allies or followers than it is to kill the same enemy. Perhaps not necessarily a good way to survive, considering if you don't kill the enemy, they're going to keep coming after you. And if you make them really ticked off at you, they might come at you in much more violent way. But hey, we got the warfare, the magic, the wandering. This is the thing about the contradicting nature of the gnome. The gnomes traditionally are portrayed in this book and the other books I've read on, not books, but fictional books, novels, that kind of stuff, where I've encountered them. They tend to be considered very shy people, very prone to avoiding contact with just about everybody that's not themselves, one of their kind. And yet, it's over and over and over again it's portrayed that these gnomes get this need to travel, to see the world, so to speak, to investigate things, to stick their big noses into places they've never been before. Perhaps to gain these stories to take home to their clan and their future children, just grandchildren, to be able to spin some wild stories. So we talk about the wandering, or this wanderlust. Unlike other short folk, unlike the halflings, gnomes are often possessed with a strong desire to wander, which I also notice is not necessarily true, because the halflings have their own version of wanderlust. It's perhaps just the gnomes have got a stronger natural need to do it. Leads them to constantly wander what's beyond the next hill, or across that sea, or even down that dark hole in the mountainside. Major compulsion for this wandering among gnomes is the desire to find the perfect gem. Tales of rich veins of rubies, or wealth of diamonds or emeralds will often draw an entire party of gnomes into a long and dangerous quest. Whether or not they're seen evidence of the find, their belief is existence it will be strong, even unshakable, and determined gnomes will brook no diversion to their pursuit of this ultimate treasure. They're obsessed with gems, not because of the monetary concept, although they understand the value of gems. They're obsessed with the gems for their extreme beauty and their durability. And the more beautiful, the more exotic, and the more everything about a gem is everything to the gnome. So that I do understand. Cipher recants the nature and the care which they conceal their community's exact location. Gnomes are willing to make friends with those visitors who themselves worthy of friendship. Many wild-eyed gnomish youngster has listened to a human knight tell of great castles, or a merchant describe wonders of a large city market. These gnomes typically grow up with a desire to see these places, and no one thinks odd when, after reaching adulthood, they pack up their belongings and head down the road. Another strain of this honest friendliness is the deep-running loyalty to those that gnomes consider friends. The suggestion that one is these kindred spirits is in trouble also proves strong motivation to bring the gnome into the adventuring road. Finally, the gnomes keep a close eye on their surroundings, are familiar with the world in general, of their general vicinity. If they notice things changing, for example, a village cropping up on what used to be a wilderness stream, they'll be irresistibly drawn to the scene to find out what's going on. And that's your gnomes. We get into the gnome character kits, otherwise potential classes. Fighter crits, the breach gnome, the goblin sticker, the mouse burglar, the tumbler. I'm making this up. Mouse burglar right there. Here. These stealthy characters are consummate spies and sneak thieves, who in some ways behave more like halflings than the average gnome thief. Striving to be quiet as mice, they infiltrate the lairs, mansions, and enemy camps. They rely on secrecy, disguise, and silence in order to conceal their presence. Preferring very much to flee rather than fight, they consider a truly successful mission one which was concluded before the victim learns that the gnome has been there. The illusionist kits, the image maker, the vanisher, the buffoon. This name of this character kit is no way of reflection on the intelligence of the character who plays the role. It does, however, reflect the way the non-gnomish world views him or her. It's a general deception that can be consistently cause enemies and other NPCs to underestimate or even ignore the character. Indeed, the buffoon carefully cultivates this role, often even to the point of concealing the fact that he or she possesses illusionist skills. In order to use this kit, the character the stalker, fighter thief, the priest kits, the rock tender, the tree tender. And we got Granite Home, a typical gnomish village. Nice little map. Lays out the various clans and their connections. Now we move into the section on the halflings. Right? Now, of all the races, playable races, the halflings are probably the most familiar or most well known. You know, we all know everything about there is to know about humans, except how the humans are viewed, or how they establish themselves, or how they control things in a given campaign world. Halflings and elves are quite similar. Halflings, on the other hand, and as I agreed before, Rob Gustrin put it out that they're a blank canvas with so many varieties of potential, so much opportunity different presentation or representation that you can almost envision halflings in any scenario, in any setting that humans could be found in, and then some. It just is what it is. So to find them in pretty much every game system, fantasy game system out there, is not totally surprising. I'm just saying, right? So of course Middle Earth includes the Hobbit. We cannot not have the Hobbit. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of stuff on this because we all pretty much know the basic things. What I want to point out a few things is how pretty much the halflings of Dungeons and Dragons and the hobbits are the same thing. You know, we all, well, yeah, of course they're the same thing. No, that's not the point. The point was that, you know, the halflings were just another playable race, but they are extremely tied to the hobbit. No matter how much you want to diversely take them apart from it, the truth is, halflings are hobbits. It's just that hobbits are called hobbits in Middle Earth, whereas everywhere else they're called something else, which, you know, rarely are they actually called halfling to their face. So, because in my example, my key reasons is the three key types. The descriptions for the three key types are repeated in here. In some cases, verbatim. There might be a slight change of words, but they're pretty much the same stuff, same thing, and this all originates from Tolkien's stuff, his works. I'm just saying, right? You don't agree? Make your own video. Add it to the comment section, right? So we talk about physical characteristics, culture, society, craftsmanship, warcraft, magic, and religion. We pretty much know all there is to know about halflings if you've read any of Tolkien's books, if you've read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, if you've watched Peter Jackson's movies on it. You know, I tend to ignore those half-hearted animated movies that were made way back in the 70s. They were lame even then. I watched them, but they were lame, terrible. Especially the Lord of the Rings. It was so lame they never finished it. They only did the first half. Then we got our various famous hobbits. And then even fewer not so famous hobbits. And pretty much any hobbit ever named in any of Tolkien's books are in here with some kind of entry, which, if you think about it, is exactly how the hobbits would present themselves, because they're huge genealogists. They're huge on keeping track of their family history and so on and so forth. Now, the culture and stuff that's in this book, the reason I didn't, like I said, I didn't go into depth on it because you don't need to. If you've read the books, you've seen the movies, you know the culture, you understand exactly how they're portrayed in this world. Although there's a few exceptions to that. There's brief mention in Lord of the Rings and in the movie where it shows Gollum finding the ring. When Smeagol finds the ring and eventually becomes Gollum, he is a member of a very small tribe of halflings who live down by the Great River in an area far from the Shire. Now, it's known that Gollum lived a very, very long time. I think I've seen references as much as 500 or 600 years, which is 3 or 4 times the standard length of a halfling or a hobbit. And so this implication was that his ancestors, the ancestors of the hobbits who settled the Shire, lived in the Gladden fields and the glades and riversides by the Great River north of Loch Lomond before the fighting and all the other stuff that was going on all the time down there between Gondor and everybody else, and prompted them to relocate to the west of the Mystic Mountains. So you see a brief different potential culture, but they don't touch on it. We don't see, other than Smeagol reflecting on the unfairness of being chased out of his mother's home, or his grandmother's home, for his behavior and somewhat ever-growing darker shenanigans the unfairness of it all, we really don't see a whole lot in that particular culture version of the halfling or the hobbit. So we look at the D&D version. As I said, this is a part of a series of books. AD&D's second edition rules supplement, player's handbook, the complete book of blah. So here we got halflings as we know them. You know, grandma sitting around telling all the young sprouts, and that includes you too, furry, of their history and their myths and how to behave as proper halflings would behave. And we got old stuff, new stuff. You know. So you see the old halflings in AD&D second edition. Halflings briefly described in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons second edition player's handbook. The three most common subraces: the harefoot, tall fellow, and stout. I'm just saying, they've changed one word, but for the most part, you're looking at the same stuff from Middle Earth. Are detailed in Monsters Compendium Volume 1. All the feral halflings of Athos are described in Dark Sun rulebook, as well as the Dark Sun Monsters Compendium. I never got into Dark Sun. I bought the box set originally. I don't know where it would happen to it, but I never got into it, never played it. Finally, players and companions set in the Dragonlance world of Kryn will find the ubiquitous Kinder has finally been ranked for better or worse among the official halfling subraces. Once again, I never got into Dragonlance. I have one or two source books for Dragonlance, but I never bought into it because it was a monetary thing. They were putting out so much stuff for Forgotten Realms. I tried to keep up with that and all these other things that were coming out for D&D. I could not do both. It was one or the other. New stuff about halflings. Following chapters provide much greater detail on halflings than any previous published rulebook. The information is intended for players to enjoy running halfling PCs, for DMs who wish to create more interesting NPCs to play in their campaigns. The primary halfling character in the typical AD&D campaign is the harefoot. This book includes additional detail, not just the harefoots, but all halfling subraces, including a nearly unknown variety, the furchin, hitherto featured only in a single Spelljammer adventure. Each subrace is differential not just by the background, but by special abilities and characteristics. Halfling Society 2 is detailed in all of its facets, a variety of halfling character kits, typical halfling village, so on and so forth. So, we got the halflings, the story of Little Man, or their mythology of their creation and how their goddess became their goddess. General history of the halfling race, the gods of the halflings, and their various entries. Other sub-races. The Wanderings of Little Man, basically still more disrespect. So we got this information on the harefoots, the stouts, the tall fellows, the Kinder, this would, if I was this human, I would be a nervous. I would be very nervous to be in this environment right now. All these little people everywhere, and I'd have a very tight grip on my purse strings. The Athasian halfling, otherwise from the world of Dark Sun. Furchin, or a polar halfling. The name of halfling. It should be noted that so far as halflings themselves are concerned, the name halfling is a misnomer. They don't consider themselves half the size of anything. In their opinions, everyone else is oversized. Their own name for their race translates simply as the folk or the small folk, a term which sometimes includes gnomes as well. Humans, elves, and dwarves are collectively referred to as the big folk. The halflings have also slightly used to refer to humans, which translate as two talls. The hearth and burrow. The most important thing to a halfling is comfort and home, and in the home, even the poorest halfling will have a hearth, and that's the center of their home and their society. The family itself, and how they all seem to work together as a group and are well versed in each other's lineages to some degree. Growing up as a child of halflings, substance and more. Halflings enjoy drinking. No reason why. I always wondered, I never considered it until recently, why it's portrayed that halflings just are non-stop eaters, that they eat 6 times a day if they can. They're always snacking when they can. The sign of a wealthy, well-off halfling or hobbit is one who has a nice gut on them, is because they have a high metabolism rate. They're small, but they may be diminutive, but they're hyperactive. They're always on the move, and that makes sense. And it talks about halflings born gardeners. Halfling brewers are well known, their products are popular, they like to specialize. I should also note how halflings favor many sorts of wines and ales. They rarely get drunk, due no doubt to their high metabolism. Rather, the alcohol tends to make them pleasantly drowsy, and a group of halflings that share a bottle of potent stuff will typically become quite relaxed, quiet, and contented as the evening wears on. So you don't see them falling down drunk. See the village, crafts and labor projects, trade. Halflings are adept at utilizing the local resources of their laborers, although only the styles are very effective at mining. All subraces are really intimately familiar with the surface features of their surroundings. Live in an area known with a lot of trees, carvers will know everything about each variety of wood available. If the environment is rocky, experienced stonemasons will predominate. Most dramatic evidence perhaps of this is the adaptability of the fact that the Furchin had developed such a high level of skill at working at new raw materials in their nearly woodless and stoneless environment. They make everything from their homes to their tools and weapons and clothing out of leather, bone, and ice. This specific skill is likely to be found in the halfling community, varied by subrace. The quality of halfling work is very consistent. While rarely the equal of the greatest artisans in the world, dwarves make better axe blades, elves better wine. On the average, it's better than average, available being everywhere else. Areas where halfling craftsmen truly excel include many tasks involving dexterity and great detail. Small folk make splendid jewelers, engravers, locksmiths, wood carvers, indeed artists of all types. They love colors, and once again, the proper sensitivity for detail allows the halfling painter to bring a scene to bright and vivid life. If clocks are known to a world, e.g. if its technology is sufficiently advanced, then it's likely the finest clockmakers will also be halflings. Halflings are ill-suited for jobs requiring strength and size, such as blacksmithing, ocean sailing, or cargo handling. Although a halfling village will usually have a smith who makes nails and horseshoes, his or her work will not be up to the level of most human smiths and will probably be for local consumption only. Same true for halfling teamsters. Trade. Barter is the way of life to a halfling. Society norms and taboos, joy and humor. Small folk love to tell and hear stories, generally be attentive and silent when anyone spins a tale. Surprisingly, they will especially love stories in which the small and clever triumph over those who are particularly physically larger and stronger, but clumsier and less quick-witted. Halflings also have a frank appreciation for baldy humor and practical jokes. They have the ability to laugh at themselves, though one prank often leads to another retaliation and so on. It's one of the reasons they probably get along with the gnomes fairly well. Sorrow and anger, riddles, village and shires, warfare, tactics, magic. Why most halflings are homebodies. Almost all halflings suffer some degree from feelings resemble a condition humans call agoraphobia, or the fear of the unknown or open places. It is not the halflings that are literally afraid, rather they become very uncomfortable whenever they're too far away from their villages and burrows or unfamiliar places. Rather, this is one of Yolanda's gifts, designed to keep them close to home and hers or hold over from the bad old days where the enemies lurk behind every tree and bush. None can say, but it has been observed that the symptoms increase with age. Half the children freely range far and wide, while the very old rarely step outside their burrows. Not that the halflings see this as a bad thing. To them, it's just simply the way things ought to be. Youth is a time for gadding about. Age is a time for rest and reflection. Why some halflings pursue adventure. And if his or her burrow and its attendant company and comforts the most important features of halfling's life, why would any halfling leave the perfection of a life short of rations, crude lodging, exposure to bad weather, danger, and possibly violence? Question asked by most of the rest of the village when a young halfling packs his or her tote bag and waves goodbye to his or her parents. His or her neighbors will often gather to see the would-be venture off, watching them already small form grow smaller in the distance. There's a good chance they'll never see their friend again. There are nearly as many answers to this question as there are halflings who walk down that road. Some do so reluctantly, some out of a sense of duty, others to find the temptations of excitement, adventure, and treasure too great to ignore. One thing almost all of them share in common, however, is that they lack the characteristic halfling dread of the faraway places, for reasons which are once again unknown. Halflings call it the legacy of little man. A few rare halflings are born entirely free of that condition, which keeps them fellows tied to their homes, that they are filled with an endless curiosity to see new places. Usually this wanderlust fades later in life and the homing instinct reasserts itself. A few halflings remain wanderers for the rest of their days. See the Traveler Kit. See, that's the truth. That's one of those conundrums I've always had about the halflings, especially when they're portrayed in urban settings. It just seems like to me that the trope is overly done. When we go into a human city of any significant size, there's going to be a cater of halflings running around trying to lift your pocket or lift your purse or con you into this, that, and the other thing, as if this is just their way of life and this is how they handle things. And yet everything you read about the halfling, everything you read about the hobbit, says the opposite, that they wouldn't be inclined to do this. So why would there be huge pockets of these types here and not the other? I think that those are the odd individuals out there in bad circumstances or situations, or survival thing, or they've just been raised in a different environment. That sets them apart from the normal halflings. They're no longer normal, and if these individuals were to find themselves in a halfling village, they would be welcome, but the regular halflings would still be a little wary of them. They would be happy to listen to their stories and tales, but would be somewhat put off or chagrined at their outwardly aggressive, outwardly looking and outwardly thinking personality types. I'm just betting that they were more than happy to have them in as a guest, enjoy their company for a while, and just as happy to see them pack up and roll on up the road. Just my point on that. Structure kits. The Archer, Forest Walker, the Homesteader, the Mercenary, the Sheriff, the Squire, the Tunnel Rat, Thief Kits, the Bandit, the Bilker, the Burglar, the Smuggler, Urchin. This was the one I was talking about. A specialized halfling thief who attempts to pass as human child. Many of the unsuspecting victims tried to call her. The annoying brat only learned that the apparently feeble child who robbed him or her is in fact an adult with all the skills of an accomplished thief. Urchins are encountered almost exclusively in cities and large towns where people don't know all their neighbors. Roaming the chaotic network of city streets and alleys, the urchin blends into the local population, keeping several escape routes and hiding holes ready at hand at all times. Living mostly on the street, urchin takes shelter where he or she can find it. Often is not among the poor, They find it as often as not among the poor and destitute of the community. It just seems cliche. That's all I'm saying. And overused. The cartographer. And of course the trader. The legitimate version of the smuggler. The traveler. Kind of like a roaming bard in a way. Popular character is a halfling equivalent of the bard, a musician, a storyteller, traveling about out of curiosity and general love of life. His or her wanderings give the character gist for the tales and legends by which he or she earns a living. Like the cartographer, he or she is curious about the wide world. But it's people, not places, that draw the traveler's attention. Something makes the traveler happy. They're meeting people from a wide variety of cultures and enthusiasm, blah, blah. So, probably one of the more common halfling types. The healer, the leaf tender, the oracle, typical halfling village, cheese factory, dairies, inns, mills, and bakery, trading stump, mayor's mansion, ventures, the fletchery, the farms, some suggested adventures for both the gnomes and halflings. So, there you have it. From the creators and visioners of Dungeons and Dragons circa the early 90s. Gnomes and halflings. The little people. Can we utilize them in better ways or in more interesting ways? The typical stereotype trope is fine. I mean, I'm not knocking it. You know, if it's fixed, don't break it. At the same time, there's so many opportunities for such different adventures. One of the campaigns I tried to create many years ago was a campaign solely set up with halflings, and it didn't last long. It didn't go well, mostly because of the group I was involved in at the time. We just, between work and other demands, just couldn't get everybody together on a regular basis, so it didn't work out. But I always wondered, you know, what it would be like if you had a campaign world that was predominantly halflings, and you're the oddball race, not the other way around. Just the fun of it, right? There's the half of it right there. The whole point is enjoying ourselves and using our creativity and stretching things out and stretching our things out. Yes, we're going to stretch the belly. Let's stretch the belly and say bye-bye, bye-bye. Here we go.